What lies behind me is the biggest expansion in the history of the Magic Kingdom. There is a Villains Land that is coming back in here somewhere. We don't know when and we don't know exactly what, but today we're going to try to figure all that out. So if you're new here, one of the things I like to do on Hey Bricky is I like to take big ideas and break them down into small, understandable pieces and work our way from small, easy to understand concepts up to much larger ideas. So what I have done, I have taken the current version of the Villains Land concept art. I have divided it up into 9 different slices. We are going to break down each slice at a time what's not only inside of that slice of concept art. By doing this and looking at a small little bit at a time, hopefully we can stay focused and get a greater understanding of the overall breadth of this project without feeling overwhelmed and lost and not knowing what we're looking at. Friends, it's the first ever tour of Villains Land. Let's jump into our concept art and work our way around this new land that will exist beyond Big Thunder Mountain. Oh yeah.
Before we dive into breaking down this artwork, it's important to note that some or maybe none of this might ever become reality. Honestly, it's more likely of a what-if scenario. But here's the catch. Even if this concept was just a thought put out at D23, it still follows the core principles of how Disney Imagineers design their parks. By analyzing it through the lens of these design rules, I discovered over 120 details that give us a glimpse into how Villains Land could be brought to life. So while it might be fiction, it is grounded in reality, and that's exactly how we'll break it down. Let's start with section 1, the bottom left. In this section, we're immediately greeted by Disney's signature rock work, a staple of creating immersive environments. The sharp, jagged edges and thorny vines give us an impression that this area is overgrown, wild, and somewhat dangerous, perfectly fitting for a villains-themed land. Notice the small figures in the foreground, which helps us understand the scale. These jagged rocks could serve either as an entrance tunnel to force perspective or as a giant wall, creating a land barrier that hides Villains Land from the neighboring areas like Big Thunder Mountain or Cars Land. On the left, the violet flowers lining the walkway trail hint at the color palette we'll see throughout the land. There's also a light post, blending Victorian shapes with a sinister twist. For now, we're going to skip this area over on the right because it's a small part of a much bigger reveal. Now let's move over to section 2, which is the middle of the far left of the image. Here, the rock work becomes even more pronounced as we see the peaks that are jagged and angled toward us. This is not only unwelcoming and dangerous, but it's doing its job to hide neighboring lands. As it points towards us, it creates a visual shield for whatever lays beyond. Something that's easy to overlook is this small tree peeking out on the outside of these rocks. This is here to provide a sense of scale that helps us realize just how tall this rock structure is. Not only are we seeing the tapering effects that create forced perspective, but we're also using spatial relationships to manipulate our sense of size. Further along, we see guests in a courtyard with teal lighting coming from the ground. Could this be the magic of villainous spells reaching out to us, or cracks in the earth pulsing with evil energy from below? There's also a divider in the distance, possibly more jagged rocks or a collection of dead vines, guiding guests while enhancing the dark, twisted theme. Beyond this courtyard, we notice what appears to be an attraction exit. Notice all of the guests are walking away from this area to indicate that what we're seeing is indeed an exit and not an entrance. We now come to the section that has fans a little bit nervous, the roller coaster. At first glance, the exposed tracks with the thorn-like features looks a little cheap, but don't worry, this is just a placeholder to indicate the ride's general form. This is the quickest way to communicate what you're looking at is a roller coaster, but I would seriously doubt it would look anything like this in all reality. These sharp tracks will be likely covered in rockwork or thematic elements to blend them into the environment. But what's most exciting is that much of this ride will likely take place within the rockwork itself, where indoor show scenes will set the stage before blasting out into the land for a fast-paced thrill ride. This first land bridge that also creates a keyhole below it indicates this is the transition from what happens inside of the rocks to what happens on the exterior of the land. Then we have this valley that seems protected by the dragon. I believe this valley could either be queue, pre-show, or ride itself. But if you notice, the rockwork on the exterior of the valley close to us is pointing inward, therefore keeping whatever's happening in there concealed to that moment where no one can look in and no one can look out. This will also benefit by allowing smoke to collect in this valley, so projections from the dragon could look way more real. And then on the outside of this ridge work, we do see small facades creating scale, making all of this seem way taller than it is. And we also see lanterns and lights around the edge. Everything placed here will be strictly for show and strictly to create scale. And how could we ignore the Raven in the center of this slice of the puzzle? Probably giving a shout out to the nearby neighboring Haunted Mansion.
And friends, I hope you're enjoying today's look at the concept art. What I've decided to do is I took 13 projects from Horizons and I'm following all of them from completion to cancellation. So I'll be coming out here often and I'll be showing you as much as I can and using my artistic and design talents to try to show you what doesn't quite exist yet and take you on this adventure, because what I love the most about the Disney parks isn't the rides, it's the vibes and the SimCity nature of the parks. I love that they're always growing, always scaling, always finding a new way to put together the perfect puzzle that is a Disney park.
In section 3, the top left has double keyholes and a lesson on forced perspective. To me, one of the most fascinating aspects of this artwork is the use of forced perspective, particularly through the double keyholes you can see here. As you look through the first keyhole, you're drawn into a seemingly endless series of ridges and valleys, given the illusion that the land stretches on infinitely. The keyholes themselves act as land bridges, allowing the roller coaster to pass through, giving us a sense of depth but excitement as we're on this bridge. Disney uses lighter colors on the distant rocks to heighten this effect, making them appear further away. And as we expand our view, looking at the top 3 tiles of this concept artwork, we notice that this rockwork is most likely covering what could be a massive show building hidden behind all of the jagged rock formations. This could be home to a dark ride attraction where Disney can always control the atmosphere. Imagine stepping into a villainous world that's dark and sinister no matter what time of day you get to ride it. Is it housing 2 dark rides on the backside of this land, like what we see with Galaxy's Edge, where Smuggler's Run and Rise of the Resistance are each hidden behind a rock ravine? Or is this where the roller coaster on the left starts but then goes outdoors? To be determined, but there is plenty of space here for plenty of dark villainous journeys that lie beyond these ridges. Let's start at the top and work our way down for the center column. The first thing that jumps out is the castle floating atop the highest spire. This reminds me of the Be Our Guest castle at the Magic Kingdom over in Fantasyland, but hopefully this version will be executed with more attention to detail. There's a land bridge connecting this spire to a neighboring one with more architecture, and the cut between the spires suggests they were once connected, likely severed by some epic battle. The storytelling throughout the landscape is what Disney does best, and I expect this to be one of the most photographed spots in all of Villains Land. Now, as we move to the center of the artwork, we begin to see how these spires work together to set up our next big reveal.
And I know that some of this artwork is pretty vague and we're kind of really digging in there, but I hope that looking at all these little slivers, it's kind of giving you an optimism on what all of this could be like when it fits together. And I also hope that focusing on one little bit at a time doesn't make it feel as overwhelming as this truly ambitious concept art was intended to be.
In the dead center of the artwork, we see 3 spires take shape, with a 4th spire now introduced. These spires are connected through a clever water system. Starting with the far left spire, we notice waterfalls cascading down into a pool that appears to trickle into the foreground. Between the second and third spires, we see another waterfall, which likely flows into the same pool. Now, moving over to the newly introduced fourth spire, we notice medieval facades and castle elements embedded into the rock, creating the illusion of a village within the cliffs. These facades likely serve as forced perspective elements. A bridge connects the third and fourth spires, with water pouring off its downward slope. This setup adds kinetic energy as the water flows behind the tree line, where guests are gathered in a courtyard illuminated by the ground beneath them. On the other side of the tree line, it's unclear if we're looking at a river that connects to Big Thunder Mountain or just a creek flowing around Villain's Land. If we look in the foreground of the center, the guests in this area appear to be elevated, surrounded by spires of rockwork, as if they are higher up than those in the lower courtyard. When we move back down to the lower level, in the distance, we see the lights that grow warmer, hinting at lava or fire flowing between the rockwork and facades. Notice the transition from green, alive trees to dead ones, accompanied by a shift in lighting from blue to fiery orange and yellow, indicating a darker, more sinister atmosphere ahead, possibly full of lava and fire. Simulated, of course. Along the path that leads us here are monuments or gate posts, suggesting the entry to a significant dark ride or the beginning of the thrilling roller coaster. Finally, as we look back to the foreground, we notice a circular stone with a hidden water feature and sculpture. This again feels elevated, making us feel like the courtyard is the lowest point inside the land, which would make sense because when you're the lowest point in the land, standing next to the tallest point in the land, that's going to create even more forced perspective. This section offers some exciting reveals, but there's even more to uncover as we get to the area that's below us. But first, let's work our way over to the far right so that the bottom and our biggest reveal makes the most amount of sense. Now moving over to the right center of the artwork, we enter the area that I believe will house the dining and shopping experiences. If you compare the scale of the guests to the facades growing out of the rockwork, it becomes clear this is where the village-like area will emerge. Think of it as a darker, more twisted version of Fantasyland at Disneyland, but perhaps constructed in a way similar to what we've seen at Arendelle and the international parks. Notice the multiple roof lines, one closest to us, a second further back, and even a third further in the distance. This layered design creates the illusion of depth, making it seem like a whole village stretches out right before our eyes. The variety of the rooftops and church-like spires add to the forced perspective, making the structures feel tall and impressive while enhancing the height of the rockwork directly behind them. Looking up at the mid-level spire, we see another keyhole that connects the rockwork beyond the village. This keyhole, combined with the spires, creates a false sense of infinity, making it seem like Villain's Land extends far beyond what we can see, representing the vastness of the villainous realm. If I know my Disney design as well as I think I do, there is a chance we are looking at a hidden S-curve, where the entryway to an attraction exists inside this keyhole, and it will only reveal itself once we have traveled around the Villain's Land village. I hope this is the case, because once we travel around this corner, your only reality would be 360 degrees of Disney Villains, a spot where you would feel truly immersed in the Disney story. Further details like the trees and brush top on top of the spires clearly manipulate our sense of scale. The small trees make the rock formations seem much larger, enhancing the sense of depth and distance. In the far left of this panel, we see what looks like a monument, or more likely, the grand entryway to a second attraction. Green lights glow behind the village, adding to the eerie, villainous atmosphere, while also indicating that the rockwork behind the rooftops is further back than it seems. On the far right, a spire emerges from the rockwork, which could serve as an entry point or exit point, perhaps connecting the opposite side of the concept art. As we move even further right, the spires angle back toward us, drawing our attention inward and keeping us within the Villain's Land sightlines. Trees behind the rockwork indicate that this is the edge of Villain's Land, with Orlando Woods likely just beyond, connecting backstage areas and eventually transitioning back over to Liberty Square. Finally, as we move down, we see guests entering Villain's Land, contrasting with the exit point to the far left of the artwork. The two streetlights flanking the entry are perched on brick pillars, each adorned with crowns, possibly referencing Maleficent or the Evil Queen. Unlike the vibrant flowers we saw earlier, this area features more traditional shrubs and trees, likely blending into the natural tree line that will transition towards the Haunted Mansion. The rockwork here creates a stepping effect, 12 feet tall in the foreground, raising to 3 or 4 stories in the background. Expertly forced perspective to make the land feel vast and immersive. We've now covered 8 out of 9 panels. Next we'll reveal the centerpiece of the artwork, which I believe holds the grand reveal for Villain's Land.
How fun is it going to be when this thing actually exists, or when we get other concept art and we can compare today's conversation to that conversation? That's why I'm having so much fun covering these Horizons projects. If you want to go on this adventure with me, make sure you subscribe to Hey Bricky. That's the best way to make sure I can keep showing up and making 3 quality videos every week. And like I said, I'm taking you on this ride of Villain's Land to completion or cancellation. And know that I am rooting for completion, because out of everything that we thought we were going to get at D23 this year at the Horizons, this was the thing that I wanted the most. I'm in love with the idea of Villain's Land.
As promised, let's dive into what I believe is the biggest reveal in this artwork. Something easy to overlook, but right in front of us. I'm referring to the massive cauldron at the bottom center. First, notice the spires around the cauldron, all pointing in the same circular counterclockwise direction. The cauldron sits much higher than its surroundings, and you can gauge this by comparing the small scale of the guest on the outer edge. The key clue is the streetlight in the bottom right corner. Comparing its size to the streetlights further down the trail gives us a clear sense of distance and height. Now moving inward, you'll see a body of water flowing into the cauldron. This water likely originates from the top spires, flowing down, pooling near a bridge, and passing through jagged rocks before reaching what I'm referring to as the cauldron. That's not the official name. But here's the twist. There are vertical waterfalls flowing into what appears to be a flat pool inside the cauldron. This doesn't follow the laws of physics, meaning the cauldron is actually hollow and we're seeing eerie green light inside, not water. As we look closer, a roller coaster track emerges from one waterfall and wraps around the other 2. Inside the cauldron itself, you can spot more coaster tracks. This giant cauldron is actually a hidden attraction, cleverly hidden right in plain sight. It suggests that the main entry to Villain's Land might just lie beyond this cauldron, although it's not shown in this artwork, but would exist directly below our point of view. Based on this full concept, I suspect we'll have an attraction here in the foreground, roller coaster over on the left, and a potential dark ride on the right. While it may not be a full e-ticket experience, this cauldron ride looks thrilling and fun, perfectly placed to be the first thing guests hear when they enter Villain's Land. Echoes of exciting screams from Magic Kingdom's Villain Land guests. Which of this would you be most excited about? Which of this do you think is realistic? And which part of this do you think is just completely out there? And let me know, did you see the attraction inside the cauldron?
So when we look at all these individual pieces of concept art that snap together that make the Voltron that is the big picture of Villain's Land, I hope that that makes it a little bit easier to understand what potentially is happening. If you enjoyed this design exercise, make sure you watch this video right here, where I do the exact same thing to Cars Land, taking over Rivers of America, one of the least popular things that Disney announced. Let's break it down and see if it's going to be worth the cost of giving up all this nostalgia.